up here at a place called Winter's Hill. It's a hill outside Port Lincoln. It's a place where tourists often come to get a good view of Port Lincoln. It's a place that's usually buzzing. There's cars everywhere, people around the place, but today there's no one here. If you've been a visitor to Port Lincoln, you've probably come to Winter's Hill. It's a hill just outside the city, a hill where people come and go, a hill that people notice. They know that it's there. Local people come up here for a walk or a run, or just to see the view. I'm here though to think about something that happened on a hill outside another city about 2,000 years ago. The town looks quiet from here, and it is. We've been given the message, stay home and save lives, and that's good. But there's a difficult side to that though. I heard a bit lately about the psychological effects of social distancing, especially for people who live alone. And going out, even to church, is not possible. Hopefully you won't start talking to the toaster, but it's easy to feel alone and abandoned. That word abandoned reminds me of something Jesus said from the cross. In Matthew's account of the crucifixion, Jesus cries out in anguish, my God, why have you abandoned me?" We often reflect on the physical pain that Jesus must have felt on Good Friday, and it's not a pleasant thought. But I wonder if for Jesus the reality was more of the emotional and spiritual pain of being abandoned by his Father. That his Father turned his face away. There's a line in that song, how deep the Father's love for us. The Father turns his face away. Can you imagine that? Jesus, so close to the Father, I and the Father are one. Why would he turn his face away? Why would God abandon Jesus? Well, you can't really answer that question without reference to us. You see, the reality of our lives is that we mess up. But it's not just that we do little acts that do damage to ourselves and our neighbours and our relationship with God. It's kind of who we are. Luther talked about sin this way. He said, sin is being curved in on ourselves. See, left to our own devices, we tend to be more concerned about ourselves than about God and other people. The Bible calls that sin. So what does God do with that? Is he like a kindly old grandpa who just kind of indulges his grandkids and overlooks their weaknesses and foibles? No, because he knows that our sin will actually get in the way of our relationships. Our relationship with him and our relationship with others. So sin needs to be dealt with. And the way that God chose to deal with sin is through Jesus, the sinless one, the perfect sacrifice, to take our sins on himself. In the Old Testament there were sacrifices. Two of the significant times of sacrifice were Passover and the Day of Atonement. At Passover, Israel remembers how God brought them out of Egypt, out of slavery. On that night, a lamb is killed, and its blood daubed on the doorway and the lintels of the Hebrew houses. And that night, way back in Egypt, the angel of death passed over the land. And where the blood was on the doorposts, he passed over those homes and did not leave them with death and destruction. The lamb was sacrificed so that the people might live. Jesus is our Passover lamb, sacrificed that we might live. Another Old Testament sacrifice is the Day of Atonement. As part of the ritual sacrifice of that day, the sins of the people are ritually laid on a kid goat, and that goat is sent off into the wilderness, symbolically carrying the sins of the people with it. In that act, the people were cleansed of their sin. Jesus is our scapegoat. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So on that cross outside Jerusalem, it's like God loading up all the rubbish, and as I'm speaking, I've actually got a council worker loading up the rubbish here at Winters Hill. And God's loading up the rubbish of all humanity. All our dark moments, all our selfish thoughts, all our impatient and uncaring actions, all the crimes that we've collectively and individually been guilty of, we've loaded them onto Jesus. God loads them onto Jesus. No wonder he turns his face away. Because you see, good and evil can't exist in the same place at the same time, just like light and darkness can't exist in the same place at the same time. And so Jesus, carrying the sin of the whole world, cries out in anguish to God, my God, why have you abandoned me? Jesus was there willingly, knowing that what he experienced meant forgiveness for you and me. In the words of that same song, it was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished.